Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a Brexit Day special of IndyCar. I'm Gordon Ross, and as the mists of battle have finally cleared this morning, and we can see how things lie after Mrs May's, well, her begging trip to Brussels last night, see how that went. We can now see quite clearly that the whole mythology around the no-deal Brexit is a bluff that's been called, because it's always been held over us like the sword of Damocles that if we didn't go along with Mrs May's deal, that the only other possibility was a no-deal Brexit. Now we know that's false, because Mrs May had never any intentions of allowing Britain to exit without a deal. Otherwise she wouldn't have scurried over to Brussels and arranged for another extension. The European Union also, counter to the accepted bluff, were also not prepared to go through with a no-deal Brexit either. So neither side in this game of bluff and counter-bluff were actually prepared to allow the European Union or the United Kingdom to separate without a deal. So we can put that to bed now. That threat is now gone, because we now know they have played that card and neither one of them was prepared to go through with it. So the bluff has been called. No-deal Brexit is a non-starter now, we know that for certain. And I believe, having looked at the landscape this morning and thought about this for some time, that the reason why the SNP has been campaigning so hard to either revoke the Act of Union or to stop a no-deal Brexit is just simply because if there was a no-deal Brexit and we crashed out in a chaotic fashion, there would be months of chaos, months of confusion, months of emergency measures, and it would be a very difficult, if not an impossible time in which to organise any kind of democratic vote on repealing the Act of Union, because it would simply be refused. The British government wouldn't permit it, and they probably wouldn't permit it to happen. They would shut down any kind of vote, because there would be so much going wrong elsewhere. The firefighting going on all across the UK would put paid to any kind of democratic process, because remember, a democratic process involves things like returning officers, local authorities, and so to actually organise the logistics of a vote. So I believe that now that threat has been neutralised and the bluff is now called, that what will happen next is that Brexit is going to go on to a much more, what should we say, a much more calm footing, that they're now going to proceed in a much more orderly fashion towards an agreement. And it could be, although I don't hold out a huge amount of hope, it could be that the Labour Party and the Tory Party together will actually come to some kind of compromise, which everybody can live with. I mean, it seems that if the European Union can come to a compromise over this delay, and believe it or not, it was only shortened to the 31st of October because Emmanuel Macron, the French president, did not want it to drag on any longer, because France is going to suffer as much or more than England will if there was a no-deal Brexit, or if there was some kind of chaotic Brexit. And he didn't want it dragging on either. So basically the shortened version of this extension, so it's slightly longer than Mrs May wanted, but it's slightly shorter than the European Union wanted, and it's about the right size for the French, means that everybody comes away having saved face, and the bluff has been called. As I said, the no-deal Brexit is no longer an option for anyone. Which leaves us with Mrs May's deal, or some variant of it, is probably going to happen, because nobody in Europe and nobody in England wants to stop Brexit. But what they do want is for it to happen with the minimum amount of impact. So it's going to be some kind of version of what's already been agreed. And that leaves Scotland in a position where we can now start to think about how we fight our own referendum for repealing the Acts of Union, because up until this point, had we crashed out today, it could have been a disaster for trying to fight any kind of campaign. And despite the hysteria over the various conspiracy theories and the doubts that people have about Nicola Sturgeon as a leader, and also about her intentions to have any kind of independence referendum. Despite all of that, it still looks as though the fight towards independence is going to also proceed at a more pedestrian pace. If you think that nothing's been happening up until now, then it's because what was going to happen has had to be delayed until the no-deal Brexit threat was neutralised. And now it's been neutralised, I believe you will start to see some movement. The problem still remains for Nicola Sturgeon is that her choice of advisors on how the new Scottish state should be set up and how the currency should be set up are causing supporters of independence all kinds of grief, because most people that I've spoken to, and I'm talking about across a broad range of campaigners, are highly worried about the way the SNP is approaching the whole aspect of currency. And this business of hanging on to the British pound until we feel ready to move forwards with our own pound is again going to cause problems, because this changeover, when is it going to be appropriate to do this change, or how long will it last? It's a bit like, how long are you going to stay, in the EU before you leave it? It's another one of these changeover questions. And sometimes it's better just to change over suddenly and abruptly and then move on from there. I'm old enough to remember, for example, decimalisation, when the whole of the currency used, the whole of the coinage used in the UK abruptly changed overnight in 1971. It changed from pounds, shillings and pence, working in base 12, and then base 20 plus guineas. From all of that complication, it moved to the decimal system immediately, overnight. And although there was a period of about a year where people were getting used to it, it worked by and large. People got used to it. There were grumbles about people making profits on the back of it because of the change in value of the coinage, but the upshot was that eventually it evened out, and it was a lot easier for people to deal with money after that. Currency is a bit different, obviously, because the currency depends on a lot more than just coinage. We're looking at Scotland needing to have a central bank and needing to have a foreign currency reserve. Now that means money earned from overseas exports in other people's currencies like dollars or yen or rubles or whatever it is. And that money needs to be banked in a central bank, which is specifically there to keep that money safe. So we have a pot of gold, we have this reserve of foreign currency that's not our money, it's not the Scottish pound, that's not the British pound, it's other people's currencies. And because the other people's currencies are so varied in their values, and they go up and down and all the rest of it, that big pot of different currencies holds its value much better than one single currency like the pound. And because of that, the value of that big pot of money held in the central reserve tends to stay much more stable. And once that starts to grow, the wealth of the nation and, if you like, the collateral that it has in the bank grows with it. And with that, the confidence of the rest of the world in our currency, the new Scottish pound, grows, because the value of our economy keeps growing and the value of that asset that's locked away in the vaults of that central bank grows with it. So that gives the country a cushion. But that takes time for us to grow. And in the meantime, we need to actually have a bank to put it in. And we need to create a bank, a central bank, without the British government knowing that we've created a new bank for our currency. Because if for one moment the British government thought that the Scottish government was creating a central bank, they would do everything in their power democratically to stop that. Because the Holyrood Parliament is set up by the British government, and it is restricted by the British government at every level, and it is watched by gatekeepers, like people like Ken Macintosh, for example, who are there to make sure that the Scottish government does not gain more power than the British Parliament wants it to have. So we have this chicken and egg situation at the moment, where we want to have a new currency, the British government doesn't want us to have a new currency. We want to have a central bank, the British government doesn't want us to have a central bank. So will that need to wait until after the repeal of the Union before we can form a central bank. And if that happens, how long will it take us to build up sufficient reserves to switch to using our own currency? There are other ways around this. One of the other ways is to seek help from other countries to put temporary investment into that central bank or into another bank, so that we have a foreign currency reserve which has been loaned to us by other countries. It gives us a pot of money that we can use to stabilise the currency before we become independent. So there's lots of different ways around this. But the problem for me just now is that the choice of advisor that the First Minister has, and the Growth Commission report, which they are using to model independence on, is the wrong model and the wrong advisor. And the advisor is basically advising the Scottish Government to behave just like the Tory London Government and to run the new Scotland in exactly the same way, based on borrowing and based on austerity. And this is not how the people of Scotland, who have been wanting independence for so long, this is not what they wanted, and this is not the model of the economy that most of us have envisaged. So when it comes to, and I'm trying to be as even-handed as possible here, but when it comes to fighting an independence referendum, people are much more clued up now than they used to be about currency. They now know that the British pound, as it's called, can be used by anybody and doesn't need a currency union. So the British government can no longer say, you're not having a currency union with us. We would still be able to use British pounds temporarily until we wanted to get our own currency started. And there are ways of kick-starting our own currency, as I've tried to explain. So I think that what will happen next is that during the SNP conference, a steady course roadmap will emerge from the SNP towards a referendum, possibly next year. I don't think it will happen this year. If there was going to be a Scottish referendum this year, I think we'd have heard a lot more hints about it. At the moment, all we're hearing is rhetoric from the SNP in Westminster. It's all, well, Scotland's not being listened to, Scotland needs independence. These are the things that the SNP would be expected to say in Westminster in response to being consistently ignored at every cut and turn. The SNP has done a wonderful job of asking to be taken into account during the Brexit process. Every week, virtually every day, they ask for Scotland's interests to be taken into account, and every day Scotland's interests are ignored, and every day the SNP points out that Scotland's interests are being ignored. It's all building a narrative towards Scotland needs to be independent, but it's not going to happen quickly, because nothing is going to happen quickly. Brexit isn't going to happen quickly, and until Brexit actually happens, the big trigger on the mandate for the referendum on Scottish repealing the Union is not really fully triggered until we actually start to leave Europe, even if it's on a great deal. Until Brexit starts to roll and we have gone past a due date and Brexit has started to occur, that's when the SNP's trigger point happens, because that's when what was actually said in the mandate, that Scotland is taken out against its will, that's when that actually happens. And at that point, I believe the independence referendum campaign will go up about 3 or 4 different gears and really start to accelerate. But at the moment, the main, what would you call it, the battle to stop Britain from Brexiting without a deal has been won. And that means that Scotland has a breathing space. The SNP has time to prepare its battle plans for an independence referendum that's not going to be fettered by an emergency in the British economy caused by a sudden no-deal Brexit. That could have resulted in a sudden power grab at Holyrood, where Mundell ended up taking over Scotland and using his 3,000 plus British civil servants to form a kind of Vichy government in Scotland. Now that would have been a disaster for independence had that happened. It's still a faint possibility, but I think it's a possibility that's receding now. So what I see ahead now is the SNP has cleared the way. The bluff of the no-deal Brexit by the Tories, that myth has been exploded, It's no longer a threat. They can't threaten no deal Brexit because we now know that neither Britain nor the EU will put up with it. So there will now be some kind of peaceful transition towards a deal of some kind. Everybody now knows that the threats that they were making were bluffs. The EU was bluffing, the British government was bluffing. Nobody was prepared to go through with it. So it must mean a deal. A compromise is going to be found. Brexit will continue to happen at a slow pace. And because it's happening at a slow pace, I expect the independence campaign to happen at a similar pace because there isn't the rush. And that, I think, is the reason why the SNP has from the very beginning not rushed to lay out its plans for an independence referendum. It would have been premature. They needed to make sure that the bluff of the no-deal Brexit was exposed first and out of the way. And I think that's now been achieved. In no small part, incidentally, to the SNP fighting alongside the opposition parties to force the government to either exit with no deal or go to in a humiliating begging mission like it did last night to Brussels to beg the EU not to let us go out without a deal. So it's been done. The bluff's called. The pathway is now clear for a more orderly Brexit. The path is now clear for a more orderly campaign towards independence. And I think we should all let that breath out that we've been holding for the last few days, because the heat has now come out of this situation, and this is what politicians don't like. They don't like making decisions under pressure at the last moment. They like to delay things. The European Union is based on compromises over long time scales. It would not fit the pattern of behaviour for them to allow a no-deal Brexit. The British government is also very gradualist. As I mentioned before, death of 1,000 cuts. When they want to do something to Scotland, they will do it piece by piece without you noticing. By the same token, we have to apply a similar technique to independence, piece by piece, brick by brick, building the country up, building up the infrastructure, building the offices of state, building up the banking system so that we can have central funds held in any bank. Doesn't really matter what it is. Our investment bank would do. We could actually stash all of our foreign currency in that if we had to do it. But my point is that the SNP's now got the chance to think a little bit more rationally about how it moves forward from here. We've passed this first danger point, and now we will wait to see what the SNP unveils at its conference. For the moment, I think we should all just have a rest from Brexit and just think about ourselves for a little while and concentrate on doing our day job. And that means building up Scotland into a viable country for the next few months, so that when we are ready to go, we can point to our new investment bank. We can point to our new benefits agency. We can point to our tax offices that are ready to roll. All of the new things that are being constructed around you at the moment, which the British state doesn't really want you to pay too much attention to. They don't want you to notice that it's happening. Those things will continue, and eventually, when you are asked for your opinion on whether we should repeal the Act of Union, you'll be able to see Scotland's ready to go. Not only ready to go, but it will have a bank to put its currency in, and it will be able to switch from pounds to Scottish pounds very quickly, not have to wait for years and years using the British pound and taking all of our economic powers from London, from a bank in another country. We won't have to do that for long if we do this correctly. Anyway, that's it for today. Complicated situation, but the big piece of news today now is that no-deal Brexit is a myth. It's never ever going to happen, because neither the European Union nor the British government will ever allow it to happen. So relax, no-deal Brexit is a non-starter. Now we're looking at a steady, slow drip towards Brexit in an orderly fashion over the next year or so. It's not going to be fast. We'll have time to mount our campaign, we'll have time to persuade people, we'll have time to put in place the bricks and mortar of the new Scottish state before we decide to vote. And I think the conspiracy theories have grown out of the fact that the SNP has been forced to wait until this threat has gone. Now that it has gone, I think you will start to see Nicola Sturgeon and other members, senior members of the SNP, starting to come forward and unveil pieces of information, bit by bit, about what will happen next. That's it for today. Look forward to seeing you tonight. I'll be hosting Scotland at 7 this evening on Broadcasting Scotland on YouTube and also live stream. So look forward to seeing you tonight, and I'll probably be telling you the same story again tonight in more detail, perhaps with some interviews. Look forward to seeing you tonight. Bye for now.